Hey everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music here, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So we are still on my mobile setup here, which I'm still tweaking, but we're going to make the best of what I can do here. I got it reasonably well, other than the hiccup in the start of the music there. So welcome. We're going to be talking about music, right? Creating music, all the creative acts of making music, composition, arranging, improvisation. That's what we do here. But specifically, counterpoint, right, is what we've been working on in, the practical counterpoint course. And we are now beginning the process of writing motets, which are, I'm using that term fairly broadly to cover a variety of types of Renaissance music that involve counterpoint, basically. So the same basic principles apply also to masses. If you're, the parts of a mass are often set in the same way, and a lot of madrigals have a fairly similar type of structure also. And so we're looking at we're looking at that type of music. So, Catherine, you're asking about future assignments. No, but I can give you a quick rundown. So, the current project right now is part one of our motet, where we start with two voices and see how far we go. And then part two. So, I just like an hour ago posted my demonstration of part two. So you can begin working on it. I haven't actually officially posted the project, but I can tell you what it's going to say. It's going to say, watch the demonstration and work on part two. So when you watch the demonstration, you'll see how I bring in voices 3 and 4, bring it to a cadence, and prepare for the next line of text. So you'll see that in the demonstration, and you can begin work on that. I'll actually post something about it, shortly after this. So that's what's going to be there. And then next week, I will post part 3, which will be the final part. And what that's going to be is do the next line of text. And I can tell you right now, it's do the next line of text very similar to how you did the first, so you could certainly get moving on that. The only tricky part is how they overlap, how you end one line of text and bring the other in. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes there's a gap, and I'll talk about that a little in my demonstration. But basically, that's what's going on for this week and next. Then, after that, is the final section of the course on fugues, and there will be a lot of material to go through, and then we'll start writing a fugue. And unfortunately, you kind of have to watch all of the material before you can really start writing a fugue, because until you understand what you're going to do with your initial theme, which is called the subject in a fugue, until you really understand everything you're going to need to do, it's hard to write a good subject. So we're not going to try to start writing a fugue right away until we've really gone through all the lessons, but then we're going to have at it and write a fugue. And again, we'll do it in pieces. So that's what is coming up. So what we're going to do now is take a look at some of the motets in progress. Before I do that, I'm going to play my demonstration one, simply because it's a reasonably decent demonstration. It came out pretty well, I thought. But you'll also get to hear a little more than you've heard so far, because so far I've only in the demonstration I stopped with two voices and said I want to bring in voices 3 and 4. I want you to hear what voices 3 and 4 are going to do. Now, I'm going to warn you up front that due to my kind of crazy mobile setup here, the sound is going to be so bear with me, and if there's stuff I need to play on the keyboard, oops, I turned my keyboard back on. I think it has a battery power save mode. Right, I'll be able to play stuff on the keyboard. So let me know if that basically works for you, what I just played. If that works for you better than hearing the MuseScore playback, but we're going to listen to MuseScore playback right now because I haven't practiced this and I haven't practiced anyone else's, and it's going to get tricky. So let's listen to the MuseScore playback and just accept you're going to have the bass response of my speakers going through this microphone are not going to be great. But let's go ahead and listen to this example. It's pretty short. Actually, I'm going to turn up everything in the mixer. So if I do that, if I crank up all of these sounds, even though I'm not using muse sounds, it's still, I got some wiggle room. Let's see if that comes out loud enough to hear better. So, let me stop that here. I started playing around with some ideas after that, but they're just going to be throwaway. So, question is, could you hear that well enough to be useful, or was it significantly better when I played? All right, yeah, so that's what I expect. Not great sound quality. That's what I heard when I did a little test, but I hope it's good enough. All right, so let me walk through what's actually going on with this, and then we'll talk about what's going on with all of the ones that have been submitted so far, at least the ones we have time for. So it starts off as a canon in two voices. That's what we're going to be looking for, right? Do not seek to follow, and then tenor is do not seek to follow, right? So we have a canon at the fifth. And it's a pretty legit canon for the first 5 measures or so. Follow, imitated by follow. Follow is how I wrote it, I guess, as far as where the melisma actually is. So the imitation is pretty exact, tonally adjusted, but other than that, no actual interval changes, no rhythm changes or anything, just not using accidentals. So it's a diatonic imitation, but then what you'll see, and this is what part 2 is going to consist of, I bring in 2 more voices with the original canon. The original canon was do not seek to follow, and then now the alto comes in, do not seek to follow. Right? It's up an octave from there. So, and then the soprano comes in with the exact same thing the tenor had, etc. So that's what is going to go on in part 2. We're going to bring in the other 2 voices and then talk about what the first 2 voices can be doing, which is really whatever you want. If you can make them imitate, fantastic. If you have to give up on imitation, that's fine too. So that's what we'll be talking about. And then eventually we get to the end of that line of text, do not follow the footsteps of the wise, which I'm now singing an octave too high, but that's the idea. We will bring a cadence in to conclude that line of text. After all 4 voices are in and everyone has recited all the words, if the last voice to come in doesn't get all the words, that's fine too. But then we're going to start the next line of text, and so that'll be part 3. So that again is my overview. So let's go ahead and flip over to where people have actual motets submitted, and we're going to start. And so I'm just going to go over these. We've got 5 of them that have been come in, and I'm just going to play through each of them because there should be enough time for this. And this is going to be one of those days where it doesn't want me to zoom in. But I already know I can force the matter with my keyboard shortcut, Control+. There we go. So I'm going to, yeah, there we go. That's nice and big. Okay. So I'm going to play Patrick's here, which is a fine beginning. So Patrick mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, that you actually were able to use the melody that you wrote in Dorian and just use it as your canon for the motet. That is going to be unusual. It's going to be unusual that if you just write a random melody that it's going to work. And we're going to talk about the extent to which it works, the extent to which you maybe have to accept some things you might rather not accept. But no, I would agree. It basically works. So let's go ahead and listen to this and then talk through a little bit. So that's really quiet. Is that true? I didn't get. I can't use the trick that I used of cranking up the mixer. Can I? I don't think I can actually on MuseScore.com. So yeah, what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to play it because I can. And going on. Whoops. I lost my half note sense. Ah, I knew I was going to fool myself that way. Okay, so I'm getting off attempting to read the treble clef down an octave. It is so disorienting to me to see treble clef down an octave as the left hand. It's the totally right way to write for tenor voice, but for me to play it on piano, it's really disorienting. I'm going to play this line again. Sorry about that. All right, so yeah, this works really well, right? I mean, this feels totally in the style. So the one thing I will say, Patrick, is that you have gone and taken that entire line of music and repeated it all in there. But realistically, at some point in here is where you're going to want to bring in your voices 3 and 4. You know, whether it's somewhere around here, probably measure 6 or so. And then when you bring in your voices 3 and 4, you're going to have to rewrite all this stuff because it's not going to work. At least it would be a miracle if it worked. So you've written more than you will need to, and you'll probably need to dump part of it when you bring in your voices 3 and 4, unless you want to wait that long to bring in voices 3 and 4, but I don't recommend it. That would not be typical at all to wait that long to bring in voices 3 and 4. And when I say 3 and 4, I'm not numbering them top bottom. I just mean the first, the second, the third, and the fourth to come in, which could be any voices you want. So Patrick has started with soprano and tenor, so your next 2 voices will be alto and bass. All right, so let me make a couple observations here. So one of them is, so he has imitation at the octave, right? And then, because this is treble down an octave, so he's got imitation at the octave, which is typical if you're writing between soprano and tenor. Sopranos and tenors are, roughly speaking, an octave apart. Same with tenor and bass. So in general, you can expect it to work reasonably well to do imitation at the octave when you're not writing for adjacent voices. If the voices are adjacent voices, you're going to be pushing someone's range, and that's where the imitation at the 4th or 5th is going to make more sense. So you've got that going on. So then the next question is, well, to what extent does it really work as is? Because I recognize this was your original melody. You made very few modifications to it to turn it into the beginning of a motet. And what I had suggested was you probably want to start over because that original Dorian melody you wrote just to practice writing Dorian melodies probably won't work as a canon. So, does this? Well, the answer is yeah, pretty well, right? We end up with a perfect fifth right here, which is a great starting interval. When you think about the lessons that we did on canons, we were focused on creating thirds and sixths between the voices, and that's where we had the whole thing about having your melody either go up a step or down a third, for imitation at the fourth, for imitation at a fifth, it's the other way around. But in any case, the goal was to get vertical intervals of a third or a sixth between the voices. And here we have a fifth, but that's the perfect place for fifths. When I say perfect place, I mean the entrance of the second voice in a motet is very often a perfect fifth like that. That open fifth as the first bit of harmony you hear is totally in keeping with the style of Renaissance and, for that matter, Baroque music. So that worked out really well. And now we have a sixth between the voices going to a fifth. Now we have a fourth between these two voices, the A and the D on Pacem. Pacem for the top voice anyhow. But that D it resolves by step. So we have a fourth that immediately resolves to a third. And it's also approached by step, so that D ends up being a accented neighbor tone. So it's legal as far as, we can put a name to it and say it works, and it does work. It sounds fine. Now, too many fourths will be awkward, but remember, at some point we're going to bring in two more voices, one of which will be the bass. When we bring in the bass voice, suddenly that fourth might not be a problem at all because we might have an F underneath it. And at that point, now we have a first inversion triad, and those are always fine. Remember, fourths are only between two voices if the bottom one is the actual bottom voice, right? So, so between two upper voices, fourths are not even a problem, even in a tiny bit. So we're going to see similar things pretty much throughout here. Right? In this measure here, we also have a fourth, but it resolves instantly to a third. Now, the next beat, a sixth going to a fourth, but that fourth then resolves by step. Now, it resolves by step to a bit of dissonance, that G against the A, and then the G resolves by step. So we have this this kind of dissonance here between the F and the C resolving to another dissonance. Is that what you would have written if you had your total free will about this? Well, maybe not. But if you already had that melody and you're trying to say, does this work in canon? Can I live with a little bit of that dissonance? The answer is, yeah, you probably can. That attitude is one you're going to want to cultivate here. Even if it's what you might not have written if you just had complete control over both voices, if it allows you to do what you want with the imitation, and you can say, you know what, it's two dissonances in a row, but that's okay. One of them's on a weak beat, and it's only a fourth, which is barely a dissonance, and it eventually resolves. If you can convince yourself that it sounds okay by listening to it, not by waving your hands and saying, oh, I'm not going to worry about it, but listening to it and asking yourself, is this problematic? And so I want to listen again. Is that okay? Frankly, the F, that fourth, didn't bother me because this feels like a triad and it feels okay to me. The G is maybe a little more problematic, but it's not the end of the world. It's fine, right? And then we have just a lot more of the same sorts of issues. Fifth going to a sixth, coming up to a fourth, and then it leaps out of that fourth, but it is all outlining a triad. So is that okay? Yeah, probably so. Plus, that ba-doo-dum is like a double enclosure, a double neighbor tone around that G. Right? So we have we have basically a dissonance that's resolving eventually. It's arpeggiating first, and that's something I've talked about, that sometimes a dissonance won't resolve right away, it'll arpeggiate first. So you get to really be a little bit loose with these sorts of things when you're asking yourself, when you're trying to write stuff in canon. You're like, well, this isn't what I would write, but the imitation wants me to do this. Can I live with it? That's the question you want to ask. And I think the answer is generally yes throughout this whole thing. There was nothing in it that I would say, no, you really need to change that. And you did change a couple things. Like I remember right around here, there was something where you changed the imitation. No, sorry. No bis pacem. You had an F in your leader, and then your follower goes no bis pacem. It has a little leap of a third where the original one was a step. Had you put that F in here, you would have had this dissonance at the end of that measure, which might not be the end of the world. I don't love that repeated note, to be honest, and I might have adjusted that F also, or maybe maybe this was originally a G, maybe that's what you adjusted. In any case, you're making the right sorts of decisions here as far as what you can get away with and what you need to adjust. So you adjusted something here so you could have a consonance there at the end of that measure and a consonance at the end of this measure. They're just different consonances because you made that little adjustment to your imitation. And that's going to be totally legit to make those little adjustments in your imitation. This is not strict canon. It's starting off usually pretty exact canon, but by the time you get a few measures in, you totally can make little adjustments like that to make it fit better. And you'll see in the examples that I showed within the course, that happens all the time. All right, so in any case, really good stuff, and yeah, it got to be a little too much for me playing it, but hopefully I didn't butcher it too badly once I sorted out my clefness. And so yeah, just really good stuff. And again, you've got a nice cadence at the end, but you are going to have to basically rip out most of the second half of this to bring in your third and fourth voice, because your third and fourth voice are going to want to restart the canon, and then you'll need to accompany that canon with something that actually works. So I'm actually going to skip ahead to Graham's, because Graham actually did bring in voices 3 and 4, and then immediately got himself into that same sort of trouble because of that issue of, well, wait a minute, is this the right one? Is this Graham's? Yes. Oh yeah, he's got all 4 voices in. So by the time he brings in the third and fourth voices, there's some dissonances that you don't really like, and that's because realistically by the time you bring them in, you have to give up on the canon. It's just the way it is. And it seems like he kind of is a little bit, but let's listen to it and check it out. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to hear this, and I can't play 4 voices, so I'm just going to play the first 2 and talk through kind of the rest. So that's the point at which he brings in the third voice. So that imitation is imitated a fifth below. A fifth and oh no, I'm playing in the wrong octave. I was still imagining it being a tenor. So, because these are adjacent voices, soprano and alto, it makes sense for the imitation to be at a fourth or a fifth, as I mentioned. And also, Graham made exactly the right choice, because I said it could be a fourth or a fifth, but your real goal here isn't whether it's a fourth or a fifth. Your actual goal is to focus on scale degrees 1 and 5. Not absolutely required, but again, it's typical. And that's what we're going for, learning how to be typical, so then we can, decide when to be atypical. So this starts with scale degree 5, and therefore the next entrance is scale degree 1. and that happens to be, a fifth below. So that's something you are going to be seeing a lot. We're going to see similar things when we deal with fugues, although the way they go about it is different. There will be tonal adjustments almost always when doing this. But in a motet, we don't need to have tonal adjustments. We're just going to keep that exact pattern of up a third, step, 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 and then the imitation was up a third, step, step, step. And then he's got something real interesting here, and I don't know if this was deliberate or not, but it sure works from my perspective. He switches to imitation at the octave, or at the unison, actually, right? It started off as imitation at the fifth. It changed to imitation at the octave when, or at the unison, when the next voice entered. So let's think about this and think, is there a reason for that? Well, he brings in the tenor on the A. Oh yeah, this is brilliant, Graham. He brought in the tenor on the A, so it's echoing what the tenor did, and now the soprano and the tenor both have an A. Whatever the alto does has to harmonize with it, but if he really imitated what the soprano did, it should have gone down a fourth after that whole note. That would have taken it down to a B. And that wouldn't have been what he wanted there. You don't want to start an entrance with a dissonance like that. It's a kind of cool sound to have those dissonances, but that would have been a little harsh. I actually did something kind of like it, but because it does resolve to a third. But so I don't know if you deliberately changed octaves at that point or changed your imitation at that point, but that is exactly the sort of thing you see composers do all the time. Just cheat the imitation. I've gone from imitation at the octave to imitation at the sixth because it gives me what I want. It gives you the feel of the imitation, but if it works better for you harmonically, you do it. Absolutely legit. So now the one thing here I could quibble about is that tritone leap down from the F from the B to the F, whether that was the best choice to begin with. You might have been better off with an A here instead of that F, right? In fact, I might have done that. I would go so far as to perhaps recommend that if there's an A here instead of an F, you have that open fifth at that first entrance of the second voice, which is again pretty typical, and then it's only a step instead of a tritone leap. I don't like that melody as much, but yeah, whatever. It's your melody. You get to make that choice. But anyhow, that's one thing I would think about. So there are places then where it moves on, and Graham wasn't as able to solve the dissonance problems, and so he's written himself in some comments here where like, yeah, I'm not so sure about this. But again, this was a little premature to try to bring in voices 3 and 4 before watching the demo, because I know you posted this before I posted my demo. I only posted my demo an hour or so ago. So you'll want to revisit from that point on after watching that demo. But I do like what you did here. I didn't demo doing what you just did here, but I got to hand it to you. That was the right call. So yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to try to play it. It's going to be quiet, and we're just going to have to live with the fact that it's quiet. But I do want to hear all four voices. So I'm going to pick up my mic and hold it right up to the speaker. So yeah, I would say there was some really good potential in what's going on here. Nothing you couldn't solve by making some other adjustments, whether they're single notes or changing your interval of imitation, or just giving up on imitation. You'll see in my demo, I just gave up on the imitation. I just let the first two voices be free once voices 3 and 4 came in, because that's the easy out. And I want everyone to have the easy out. I don't want you to feel like you have to maintain the imitation, because you definitely don't. You get bonus points if you do, but you'll totally see plenty of motets where the imitation basically ends after a few bars, and I want to make sure people are just okay with that, because I am. All right, so now we're going to try Shelley's, and Shelley also has brought in a voice 3 and 4. So I'm going to again hold up the microphone to the speaker and let it play, and then we'll just talk about the first few bars. Here we go. All right, so great job there as well. So it looks like, yeah, you brought in a third and fourth voice, but then the soprano dropped out, so you never actually have four-part harmony in here. So I would suggest that when you do part two, your entrances seem fine, and I would just look at giving the soprano something to do. And what I did in my demonstration, in fact, I'll do a quick little version of it here. I look for opportunities to just steal a little bit of a motif, to feel like I'm related to what's going on, even though it's not anything real specific. So I look at this little pattern and say, oh, there's a nice little pattern. Can I find something for the soprano to do in these last few bars that is kind of like that? What beat is that? So it starts on an off beat. So like in this measure, there's a D and a B flat. No, that doesn't work, but that would give me parallel octaves. There we go. So, you see what I'm doing? I'm trying that motif at different pitch levels. I could be more scientific about it, but whatever. I just try it until I find something that works. I do that with fugues a lot too, trying to make stretto. So, no. Right? That totally worked. If I imagine the soprano going rest, B flat, C, B flat, that C will line up with this A, and the B flat will line up with that G, and then it'll go down to an A that comes in along with those Fs and the D. So that would have worked beautifully, just to give it a little just that little lick. And I just randomly jumped out at that lick thinking it looks distinctive. It could have been this little line. It might have been that little line that I'm like, can I find a place to bring in something that resembles that line somewhere in these couple bars so the soprano has something to do that feels connected and fills out the harmony a little bit. So that's really all you need to do in doing your part two. So yeah, so this one has also gone ahead a little bit, but I want to comment on a couple really cool things she's created. So first of all, she's got this nice little. So first of all, bum bum bum. So this G against D is another fourth dissonance, but it's just a neighbor tone, right? So we have, oh yeah, there's all sorts of like little suspensions and things going on here. So this actually is a little maybe awkward here. We're going from a third to a fourth, and then that fourth jumps down to a sixth. Maybe instead of leaping out of that fourth, if it had stepped out, it might have been a little better. And then you could ask yourself, well, that is the follower. Could I do that in the leader also? March winds. You could totally backtrack and do that because it's your, that this isn't a cantus firmus, right? You weren't given, this wasn't handed to you on a stone tablet from on high, that melody. It was your melody. So if you discover you need to make a change to it in the follower to work, well, then you can go ahead and change it in the leader too, right? So in any case, we have this fourth leaping down to the sixth, so that's why I might have done that. Is it the end of the world? Frankly, no, because again, fourths are only barely dissonances. That fourth here comes down to a third, so it is a neighbor tone. It's coming off a tritone, so we're coming from a tritone into a perfect fourth. That's kind of a lot. So this fourth at the end of measure 3, then the tritone at the beginning of, almost the beginning of measure 4, going into a fourth, that is kind of a lot of dissonances. But what happens next is a dissonance, a second, that then goes to a third. So that is a beautiful little bit of suspension. And then this B is, this is a neighbor tone, because we have C, B, C, and yes, we end up with a fourth between these two voices, but at that point, the tenor has come in to give that fourth support, and it is no longer at all problematic. It's a fourth between upper voices, so we can stop worrying about such things. So, and then she has, there was another little, I thought I remember being, oh yeah, we have consonants here. This is the preparation here, D, F, and F. Tenor moves, creates a dissonance against that F, and then the soprano moves to resolve it. Meanwhile, we still have a dissonance against the bass, but then the tenor eventually moves to resolve it as well. So it's got kind of that fourth species creating tension and then asking another voice to resolve it between them. So it's got a really good feel as far as that goes. So yeah, this one is also nicely ready for you to look at the demo for part 2 and just see what you want to fix up about this, and then put a cadence on it, because that's what I also show, putting a cadence on it. And my cadence, and when I put a cadence on mine, you may have, maybe you didn't notice, but I'm going to show you, I didn't put lyrics on my cadence for one good reason. I've got lyrics, then I hit the cadence here. I'm probably going to throw away part of that cadence, because I'm going to want my next phrase to overlap the cadence a little bit. I'm going to want the first voice entry of the second line of lyric to perhaps overlap the last beat or two of my cadence. Not required, but I want to give myself that option, and I'm going to try to make it happen. So this is me playing around with some ideas, but when I do these demos, they are pretty off the cuff. I've maybe thought a little bit about them, but I definitely haven't already written it, and then I'm just pretending it to write for the demo. No, I really write these things, but I have played with the ideas a little bit. I've improvised a little bit first, and then I write a new melody. So anyhow, so my cadence is sort of a placeholder cadence here that I know I'm going to rewrite a little bit when I finally finish. All right, so let's move on. This one here is Kevin's, and Kevin has asked himself some good questions here, and has prepared himself well, I think. Where's the question? Oh yeah, not sure if starting with alto and tenor will make things difficult in part 2. It doesn't necessarily. You're starting with two adjacent voices, and they're a fifth apart, right? Alto and tenor, and then soprano and bass will also be a fifth apart. A fifth plus an octave, and so it's going to have a different feel when you bring in soprano and bass. So I will say maybe in principle, that might be the least common choice, starting with the inner voices and then going to the outer, or the other way around, starting with the outer and then going to the inner. Logic would tell us that would be the least common choice, because it means that the next two voices, when they come in, have a different interval relationship, but it's not that different. It just means there's an extra octave involved. Instead of just being a fifth apart, they're an octave and a fifth apart, which really isn't the end of the world. So no, it's not inherently going to be more difficult. So again, I'm going to let MuseScore play this, and then I'll play it. So beautiful job, Kevin. And yeah, this is like this is nailing it to me. You've got the first two voices in there, and all the intervals are really working well. They're mostly consonant intervals. Um, uh, right, this is all very consonant here, which is fine because you don't need to have dissonance. You'll there's like passing dissonances. Ooh, what is that? Okay, so that maybe wants a little rethought, but we have a tritone here as a passing tone, right? And then we have a fourth there as a passing tone. So the passing tones are the dissonances you have, and other people had stronger dissonances, and these are just a couple very small dissonances, but by the time you bring in voices 3 and 4, you'll have plenty more opportunity to play with that. So in case anyone didn't pick up, what I'm talking about there is those are parallel fifths. So if you wanted to fix that, your follower is the bottom voice. So all you have to do is change that bottom voice, right? The top voice, the bottom voice is the leader, so it is free. The top voice, we can't change that B unless we want to go back to the previous measure and change that. But then that means we also have to see if it works with what was there. So yes, I did say you can change something in your follower and then go back and change the leader, but if the other voices have already entered, it might have a ripple effect and it might be a pain in the butt. That other place where I talked about it was right at the beginning, and so there was complete freedom to change that leader. So yeah, I would look at changing that line. Ba-dum. Instead of going ba-do, ba-da-dum, I might go ba-do, ba-dum, or something. Ba-da-da-dum, maybe that. Da-dum, hold the D. Da-da, hold the D, and then E, F, G as a passing figure, then we would never notice those fifths. So that's about the only thing I would suggest there. So no, this is really good. It's all mostly thirds and sixths between things, and it really has a nice sound. And the nice thing about thirds and sixths between things is it then means when a third voice comes in, it can complete the triad. So yeah, somewhere around here is where the third and fourth voices enter, and this is in great shape to do that. And yes, as you're mentioning here, these cadences will be revised because depending on where you bring in, you get to choose where to bring in voices 3 and 4. You're allowed to bring them in right away, right? You could try to bring in voice 3 and 4 here, but then you'll probably have to sacrifice something about this other stuff. I would probably wait till around bar 5, 6, or 7 before I try to bring in voices 3 and 4. But then all this stuff will have to get moved later because you won't want your cadence until all 4 voices have had their say. Can you hear all that noise? I've mentioned I am, in case anyone has missed this, I'm at my wife's school where she is the music teacher. Today is the last day of school, and boy, are the kids excited. 15 minutes from now, school lets out because they're doing a half day today. All right, so, yes, so great stuff there, Kevin. This is in great shape to be carried into the next step. So I've got one more here if it wants to finish loading here, and this is Mark Edelston. And again, I'm going to let MuseScore play it, and then I will try to play it myself. All right, that's going to be too quiet, right? There's no way you can hear that, is my guess. So I'm going to just decide that that's not really going to work. Yes, Paul. Yeah, yes, you're right. There's only one cadence after all 4 voices have finished reciting that first line of text. That's where the cadence happens. Now there can be little kind of mini cadences within, yeah, but the main cadence is going to be after all 4 voices have come in. So you'll see me move my cadence. I'm going to literally copy and paste it further on, insert measures, etc. in my demonstration for part 2. You're going to move that cadence till after all 4 voices have had their say. So, I'm now going to try to play this best I can. It's going to be a little tricky with all the quarter notes and again that tenor voice, so bear with me. But we have sorry. I'm going to start with this measure. Boy, I'm off. I'm going to play that again. Sorry about that. All right, that was correct. I'm going to move on. So, what we have here is this feels older to me, right? There's an aspect of this that feels more chant-like. It's because of how long that melisma is that feels more plain chant coming from a somewhat earlier time, like earlier in the Renaissance. That's how it sounds to me, which is really cool. I love it. There is something going on in the choice of voices here, so you'll want to pay attention to this. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but I'll talk about what you might want to do, Mark. You got your soprano starting on this D here. Your tenor is coming in on this D here. I mean, on this A here. Well, soprano and tenor are, as I mentioned, kind of essentially pitched an octave apart. Not like every note they sing is an octave apart, but their basic ranges are an octave apart. So what's happened here is you have your tenor coming in not an octave below this tenor soprano, but only a fourth below. What that means is that you're going to be pretty high. And that happens, right? You get to this F here. That F is towards the upper end of a tenor's range. And then you get to this stuff up here. You're really, and this isn't even exact imitation at that point, because yeah, that note should have been quite a bit higher still. So am I reading the octaves wrong? No, I don't think I am. Yeah, so this F is, this is where you stop your imitation. So this is where the imitation, you've got the whole note to the whole note, whole note to the whole note, then you got three descending notes, but then where one of them starts that process of quarters, this guy starts with a dotted quarter into quarters and just has a different line that doesn't go up as high. So you manage to avoid making the tenor like hate you for going too high, right? But it is pushing it, and what it also means is there's not room for an alto between them. So it's fine because we don't need an alto here. As long as you open up more space between those voices before the alto enters, you will be fine. So that's one of the things you want to pay attention. It's okay for the soprano and tenor to be close together if there's no alto, but when by the time the alto comes in, you're going to want to open up that space. But here's the other thing. There's no law that says there has to be an alto. It could be soprano, soprano, tenor, tenor. Soprano, soprano, tenor, bass. Soprano, tenor, tenor, bass, right? I mean, you're allowed to write for different combinations of voices other than SATB. Now, if you want the thing performed by a choir, it helps to write SATB because that's what people are set up to do. But you'll see a lot of Renaissance motets written for, and Baroque for that matter, cantatas and the different things, the masses, where the voices that are written for a given passage might not be SATB, but might be just ATTB or something, whatever like that. So there's a couple things going on here that are interesting and not problematic, but when I said that there was a sense in which it was older, there's also a sense in which it's very much not. So all good so far. Now, the fact that this note here, G, lines up with that A, this is second species, right? If you want to look at it that way, it's 2 against 1. And you are putting the dissonance on the beat. And that's that's not so in keeping with the style that otherwise it feels like you're going for and achieving, frankly, for that matter. So I might wonder about that G against that A, whether that's really good. And Dave, yeah, you're probably right that going down an octave is a possibility, but then that A down here, I mean, doesn't sound like a low A, but that A is below. That's a really low note for a tenor. A lot of tenors are going to go, no, no, thank you. They might rather sing the higher notes. So unfortunately, that's not necessarily an option. Now, could you change octaves? You could totally do that, right? Then drop down the octave. That octave displacement is legit in this style. I would hate to have to do it here. I feel like that would be the cop-out solution, and better solution is to think about maybe this is an alto line, not a tenor line. That's the easy solution here. If you want to do that imitation at the fourth like that, use two adjacent voices. Don't try to do it in soprano and tenor. That's the obvious choice there. Or do it in soprano and bass and live and say, yeah, it's going to be one of those things where there's going to be an extra octave between them, and then when the alto tenor come in with a repetition of the same canon, they'll be closer together but the same intervals. So yeah, the tenors love the lines going up to the top A, but if you were to have kept this imitation, well, Marc is the one who did this, that line actually goes up to an F here in the soprano, and this is imitation a fourth below. That would have been a C. That would be a high C. I mean, that's like higher than that's the really high note for a tenor, right? That's higher than the Nessun Dorma note, which is how the Queen of the Night is the highest note that most people ever have to think about singing, and no one ever sings that other than the few maniacs who do. The Queen of the Night soprano note and the Nessun Dorma tenor note. There's plenty of higher notes out there. But since I don't know that much operatic music, those are the ones I always come back to. Anyhow, so yeah, that line would have taken it all the way up to a C had that imitation been exact there. So that would be that'd be a lot. So yeah, you could shift it to the alto and make your life easier, or you could look at one of those other solutions that I mentioned. And oh God, okay. I think I'm going to be wrapping up because I think that they're about to come up with an announcement here, and I can't shut it off. So, wow. Okay. Okay, that's fun. All right. So, yeah, the school is letting out. Things are going to be real crazy. So let's just call it. I've talked about everyone's stuff. And I look forward to talking to you all next time. And again, go ahead and look within the course. If you look in the course, you'll see the demonstration for part 2, and I'll post an actual project assignment, but it'll just say watch the video and do it, right? So I want everyone moving on to part 2. Next week I'll post part 3, and that will wrap it up. So this has been a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying the different kinds of music we're creating here, right? We're creating so much different kinds of music in this course, and you all are nailing it. So it's so gratifying to me. So thanks, and see you all next time. Goodbye.